Have you ever been told to just let it go after someone destroys your entire world? Have you ever felt that burning sensation in your chest when people who hurt you the most expect you to smile, nod, and pretend nothing happened? Well, let me tell you something that will probably resonate with every cell in your body. I was expected to forgive and forget the unforgivable, and instead, I chose a path nobody saw coming. I chose to document every single thing, and yes, I chose to send them a bill they'll never forget. My name doesn't matter for this story, but what matters is what happened to me, what I discovered about human nature, and how I transformed my pain into something they never expected. This isn't just a revenge story. This is about dignity, self-worth, and the moment I decided I was worth more than their convenient narrative of forgiveness. Sit back, because this journey is going to take you through the darkest corners of betrayal and into the light of the most satisfying vindication you can imagine. I was 32 years old when my entire existence shattered into a million pieces, and I'm going to tell you exactly how I picked up those pieces and turned them into weapons of truth. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't announce itself with trumpets and warning signs. It creeps into your life wearing the mask of normalcy, hiding behind smiles you trust and words you believe. For years I thought I had everything figured out. I had what everyone told me was the perfect life. The kind of life people post about on social media with carefully curated photos and captions full of gratitude. I had a partner I loved deeply, a career I had built from scratch, friendships I cherished, and a family I thought would always have my back. But here's what nobody tells you about perfect lives. They're often one revelation away from becoming perfect nightmares. The day everything changed started like any other ordinary Thursday. I remember the smell of coffee brewing in our kitchen, the sound of morning traffic outside our apartment window, the feeling of routine comfort that comes from knowing exactly what your day will look like. I had no idea that within hours, I would discover something that would make me question every single moment of the past 5 years of my life. I had no idea that the person sleeping next to me every night had been living a completely different reality, one that involved lies so elaborate they would have made a professional con artist proud. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the foundation of what I thought was unshakable trust. I met Jordan, let's call my partner that for privacy reasons, at a professional conference 6 years before everything fell apart. You know that feeling when you meet someone and it feels like the universe orchestrated the entire encounter? That's exactly what it felt like. Jordan was charismatic, intelligent, articulate, and had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. We connected over our shared passion for sustainable architecture and our dreams of creating eco-friendly urban spaces that would change how people interact with their environments. Those first conversations stretched into hours, then days, then a relationship that felt like it was written in the stars. Everyone who knew us said we were perfect together. Our friends, our families, even strangers who witnessed our interactions. We completed each other's sentences, shared the same values, or so I thought, and built what I believed was an unbreakable foundation of mutual respect and honesty. We moved in together after a year, combined our lives in every way that matters, and started planning a future that included marriage, children, and growing old together in one of those houses we designed ourselves. I supported Jordan through a difficult career transition, celebrated every success, and stood by through every failure. I thought partnership meant showing up for each other unconditionally, and I showed up every single day with my whole heart. What I didn't know was that Jordan had a completely different definition of partnership, one that apparently included maintaining relationships with 3 other people simultaneously, using our shared resources to fund secret getaways, and creating elaborate lies that would require a flowchart to track. But I'm still not at that part yet. First, I need you to understand the depth of my investment in this relationship, the level of trust I had cultivated, because only then will you understand why the betrayal cut so deep. It felt like a physical wound. I had introduced Jordan to my family, integrated into Jordan's family, built friendships with Jordan's friends, and created a social circle that revolved around our couplehood. My entire identity had become intertwined with this relationship, and I genuinely believed we were building something beautiful and lasting. I remember countless evenings sitting on our balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, talking about our dreams and making plans that extended decades into the future. I remember the way Jordan would hold my hand during difficult conversations, the way we navigated disagreements with what I thought was mature communication, The way we celebrated small victories and mourned small losses together. Every memory I had was now going to be tainted by what I was about to discover. And that realization, when it finally hit me, was almost more painful than the betrayal itself. The discovery happened in the most mundane way possible, which somehow made it even more devastating. I wasn't snooping or searching for evidence of wrongdoing. I was simply trying to find our insurance documents because I needed to schedule a medical appointment and couldn't remember which provider we had chosen during the last enrollment period. Jordan's laptop was open on the dining table, unlocked because we had always had an open device policy in our relationship. We trusted each other completely, or at least I trusted completely, and Jordan was excellent at pretending. I clicked on the Documents folder, scanning through files with names like Tax Returns 2023 and Apartment Lease Agreement, when I noticed a folder labeled with a date from 2 years ago and the word private in parentheses. Now, I'm not naturally suspicious, but something about that folder felt off. Why would Jordan need a private folder on a laptop I had full access to? Why was it labeled with just a date? My hand hesitated over the trackpad for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. I could have closed the laptop, walked away, maintained my blissful ignorance. But curiosity, or maybe some subconscious intuition that something was wrong, made me click. Inside that folder were hundreds of files, photos, screenshots of conversations, receipts, booking confirmations, and documents that painted a picture so completely different from my reality that at first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. There were photos of Jordan with someone I didn't recognize, intimate photos that made it clear this wasn't a friendship or a work relationship. There were message screenshots showing conversations that spanned years, filled with the same terms of endearment Jordan used with me, the same inside jokes I thought were ours alone, the same promises of future commitment I believed were exclusive to our relationship. My hands started shaking as I scrolled through file after file, each one adding another layer to a reality I had never suspected. There were hotel receipts from weekends Jordan told me were work trips or visits to family members. There were flight confirmations to cities Jordan had supposedly traveled to for conferences. There were credit card statements showing purchases at restaurants I had never been to, gifts I had never received, expenses that were charged to our joint account, the account I had contributed to equally, believing we were building our shared future. I felt my stomach turn, my vision blur, my entire body go cold despite the warmth of our apartment. This wasn't just a mistake or a moment of weakness. This was systematic deception that had been maintained for years with careful planning and execution. But that first folder was just the beginning. As I continued clicking through Jordan's laptop with hands that wouldn't stop trembling, I discovered there wasn't just one other person. There were three. 3 separate relationships, each maintained with the same level of care and attention Jordan had shown me. Each person apparently believing they were in an exclusive, committed partnership with Jordan. The level of organization required to maintain this deception was staggering. Jordan had separate calendars, separate email accounts, separate social media profiles I had never known existed. There were detailed spreadsheets tracking lies told to each person, ensuring consistency across stories. There were notes about preferences and important dates for each relationship, like some twisted version of customer relationship management software applied to romantic deception. I sat at that dining table for hours, frozen in a state of shock that felt almost like an out-of-body experience. I watched myself clicking through files, reading messages, examining photos, but it felt like I was watching someone else's life fall apart, not my own. The sun set outside our windows. Darkness filled our apartment, and I never turned on the lights. I just sat there in the growing shadows, illuminated only by the laptop screen, discovering the truth about the person I had planned to spend my life with, the person I had trusted with my heart, my finances, my future, my everything. At some point, I don't remember exactly when, the shock began to transform into something else. It wasn't anger yet, not the burning rage that would come later. It was something colder, more calculating. As I looked at the meticulous records Jordan had kept of every lie, every manipulation, every carefully orchestrated deception, I realized something that would change the entire trajectory of what came next. Jordan had documented everything. Every receipt, every message, every photo, every lie was cataloged and saved. And if Jordan could document deception so thoroughly, I could document the truth just as thoroughly. That's when the idea first formed in my mind. Still hazy and undefined, but present nonetheless. I wasn't going to confront Jordan with tears and accusations. I wasn't going to fall apart or beg for explanations. I was going to do something different, something that would honor the professional, organized person I had always been, even if Jordan had never truly known that person at all. Have you ever experienced that moment when pain transforms into clarity? When devastation somehow sharpens your mind instead of clouding it? That's exactly what happened to me in those dark hours sitting at our dining table. I started my own documentation process right then, beginning with photographing every single file on Jordan's laptop. I uploaded everything to a cloud storage account Jordan didn't know about, creating my own archive of truth to counter the archive of lies. I worked methodically, systematically, professionally, the same way I approached complex architectural projects, except this time I was designing the blueprint for my own liberation. When Jordan came home that night around 11, I was sitting on the couch with all the lights off, my face probably unreadable in the darkness. Jordan asked if I was okay, why I was sitting in the dark, if something had happened. I remember my voice sounding strange to my own ears when I said I was fine, just tired, just thinking about work. The lie came so easily, and I realized in that moment that deception wasn't actually that difficult when necessary. Jordan accepted my explanation without question, kissed my forehead, and went to take a shower. I listened to the sound of water running, thinking about how many times Jordan had come home from being with someone else and stood in our shower, washing away the evidence before climbing into bed next to me. How many times had I been completely oblivious to what was happening in my own life? The thought made me feel physically ill, but I pushed the nausea down. I couldn't afford to fall apart now. I had work to do, plans to make, documentation to complete. That night, lying in bed next to someone who was essentially a stranger despite 5 years of shared intimacy, I made a decision that would define everything that came next. I wasn't going to react emotionally or impulsively. I was going to treat this situation like any other project that required careful planning and execution. I was going to document every aspect of what had been done to me, and then I was going to make sure there were consequences that matched the magnitude of the deception. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. Let me tell you about the weeks that followed, about the double life I started living, about how I became an investigator of my own life while pretending everything was perfectly normal. The next morning I woke up and went through my usual routine with an Oscar-worthy performance of normalcy. I made coffee, discussed our plans for the weekend, kissed Jordan goodbye as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I had changed fundamentally in those hours of discovery, and there was no going back to the person I had been before. I went to work at the architecture firm where I was a senior designer, and somehow managed to focus on my projects despite the chaos in my mind. During my lunch break, I opened a new laptop I had purchased that morning with cash, ensuring Jordan would have no way to trace my activities. I created new email accounts, new cloud storage, new everything. I started building a parallel system to document not just what I had already discovered, but what I was going to discover as I dug deeper into the truth of my relationship. I began to research. I found out the names of the 3 other people through the files on Jordan's laptop. Let's call them Alex, Morgan, and Casey for privacy. I discovered their social media profiles, their workplaces, their addresses. I learned that Alex had been in a relationship with Jordan for 4 years, overlapping with our relationship by 3 years. Morgan had been involved for 2 years, and Casey for about 18 months. Each of them had different stories they believed about Jordan's life. Alex thought Jordan was a freelance consultant who traveled constantly for work, which explained the irregular schedule. Morgan believed Jordan was going through a difficult divorce and couldn't fully commit until it was finalized. Casey thought Jordan was caring for an ill parent in another state and could only visit occasionally. The creativity and complexity of these lies were almost admirable in a twisted way. Jordan had essentially created 4 separate identities, 4 separate lives, and maintained them all simultaneously for years. I started tracking Jordan's movements using the location data from our shared phone plan, something I had never thought to check before because I had no reason to doubt where Jordan said they were going. I cross-referenced credit card statements with calendars and discovered patterns of deception so elaborate they would have made a spy proud. Every work trip had actually been time spent with one of the others. Every late night at the office was dinner with someone else. Every weekend visiting family was a romantic getaway funded partially by the money I had contributed to our joint account. As I compiled this information, I started to notice something interesting. Jordan had been stealing from me financially in ways I had never recognized. Our joint account, which we had agreed to contribute to equally for shared expenses, had been systematically drained for expenditures that benefited Jordan's other relationships. Hotel rooms, flights, gifts, dinners, all paid for with what I had thought was our shared money. I calculated that over the course of our relationship, Jordan had spent approximately $47,000 of joint funds on maintaining these other relationships. $47,000 of my money. Money I had earned through long hours at my firm. Money I had contributed believing we were building our future together. That's when the idea truly crystallized. If Jordan could bill our joint account for secret relationships, I could bill Jordan for the emotional labor, time, and resources invested in a relationship built on lies. I know this sounds cold, calculating, maybe even ridiculous to some of you watching this. How can you put a price on emotional devastation? How can you quantify the value of trust destroyed or years of your life spent in deception? But here's what I realized. Jordan had already quantified everything by maintaining such detailed records. Jordan had assigned monetary values to lies through every receipt saved, every expense tracked. If Jordan could be so systematic about deception, I could be equally systematic about accountability. I started documenting everything in my own life that I had invested in our relationship, every gift I had given, with receipts where available and estimated values where not, every trip I had paid for, every dinner, every contribution to our shared life. I documented the emotional labor, the hours spent supporting Jordan through career difficulties, the time invested in maintaining relationships with Jordan's family and friends, the energy expended on planning our future together. I created spreadsheets that would have impressed the most meticulous accountant, breaking down 5 years of investment into categories: financial contributions, emotional labor, time investment, opportunity costs, and damages. Under financial contributions, I listed everything from the furniture I had purchased for our apartment to the vacation I had funded entirely when Jordan was between jobs. Under emotional labor, I assigned hourly values to the time I had spent as an unpaid therapist, career counselor, and support system. Under time investment, I calculated the hours spent on relationship maintenance activities that were based on false pretenses. Under opportunity costs, I listed the job opportunities I had turned down to stay in the same city as Jordan, the relationships I had let fade because I was focused on building a life with Jordan, the personal projects I had put on hold. Under damages, I calculated the cost of therapy I would need to process this betrayal, the financial impact of dissolving our shared life, and a figure for pain and suffering that, while somewhat arbitrary, felt appropriate given the magnitude of deception. The total came to $173,000. $173,000 for 5 years of my life, spent in a relationship that was built entirely on lies. Now, I want to pause here and ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where you invested everything into something or someone, only to discover it was all based on deception? Comment below and let me know, because I promise you, you're not alone in this experience. The sense of violation, the feeling that your reality has been rewritten without your consent, these are universal experiences when trust is shattered so completely. I spent 3 weeks building my case while living this bizarre double life. Every morning I woke up next to Jordan and pretended everything was normal. I engaged in conversations about our future, made plans for a vacation we would never take, discussed paint colors for the apartment renovation that would never happen. At work, I functioned on autopilot, my mind always partially elsewhere, always calculating, always documenting. My colleagues noticed I seemed distracted, but I blamed it on a challenging project, and they accepted the explanation. In the evenings, after Jordan fell asleep, I would slip out of bed and work on my documentation for hours, cross-referencing bank statements with calendars, calculating compound interest on money that had been misappropriated, building an airtight case for accountability. The thing that struck me most during those weeks was how easy it was for Jordan to lie to my face. There was no hesitation, no tells, no visible signs of deception. Jordan looked me in the eyes and made plans for our future, discussed wedding venues we might like, talked about names for children we might have. Each lie was delivered with complete conviction, and I realized that I was living with someone who was either a sociopath or had simply spent so many years lying that it had become second nature. as natural as breathing. I found myself studying Jordan like a specimen, trying to understand what kind of person could maintain this level of deception without apparent guilt or remorse. Was there ever a moment of conscience? Did Jordan ever feel bad about coming home to me after being with someone else? Did any part of Jordan's brain recognize the monstrosity of what was being done to 4 different people who trusted completely? During those weeks, I also started researching the legal aspects of what I was planning. I consulted with lawyers under the pretense of needing advice for a friend's situation, never revealing it was my own. I learned about civil suits for fraud, about the recovery of funds obtained under false pretenses, about the concept of quantum meruit, compensation for services rendered. The legal framework existed to support what I was planning, which gave me confidence that this wasn't just an emotional reaction, but a legitimate approach to seeking accountability. I also reached out anonymously to Alex, Morgan, and Casey through carefully created fake profiles on social media. I didn't reveal who I was or what I knew, but I asked carefully crafted questions that helped me understand their perspectives and confirm what I had discovered. Each of them truly believed they were in exclusive relationships with Jordan. Each of them had been fed elaborate lies that explained why Jordan couldn't be more present in their lives. Each of them had invested their hearts, their time, their resources into relationships they thought were real. I felt a kinship with these strangers who were connected to me through shared victimization, and I knew that whatever I did next couldn't just be about me. It had to be about all of us. By the end of the 3rd week, I had compiled a document that was over 200 pages long, complete with photographic evidence, financial records, timeline analyses, witness statements from people who had unknowingly confirmed Jordan's whereabouts at crucial times, and a detailed accounting of every lie I could verify. I had created a presentation that would have been impressive in a corporate boardroom, complete with charts, graphs, and visual aids that told the story of systematic deception with ruthless clarity. I had drafted a formal invoice addressed to Jordan, itemizing every expense, every contribution, every hour of emotional labor, with payment terms that were completely serious despite how absurd the concept might seem to someone on the outside. The invoice had a cover letter that explained the methodology behind my calculations, referenced the legal precedents that supported my claim, and gave Jordan 30 days to respond with either payment or a legal challenge. I had also prepared a contingency plan for every possible reaction I could anticipate. If Jordan refused to acknowledge the invoice, I had already consulted with a lawyer about filing a civil suit. If Jordan tried to intimidate or threaten me, I had already shared copies of all my documentation with a trusted friend who was instructed to make everything public if anything happened to me. If Jordan tried to turn our mutual friends or family against me, I had prepared a separate document explaining the situation with evidence that was irrefutable. I had thought through every scenario, every possibility, every potential outcome. For the first time since discovering the truth, I felt like I had some control over my situation. I wasn't just a victim reacting to what had been done to me. I was someone actively shaping the consequences and demanding accountability on my own terms. But I still needed to figure out the right moment and method for the confrontation. I couldn't just hand Jordan an invoice over breakfast and expect a productive conversation. This needed to be orchestrated carefully, not for dramatic effect, but because I wanted to ensure I maintained the upper hand throughout the process. I wanted Jordan to understand that this wasn't an emotional outburst that could be talked away or minimized. This was a systematic accounting that had been built with the same level of care and attention Jordan had applied to maintaining the deception. The opportunity came during what was supposed to be a celebration dinner for Jordan's promotion at work. Jordan had just been made partner at the consulting firm, something we had supposedly been working toward together for years. Jordan wanted to go to an expensive restaurant downtown, the kind of place where you need reservations weeks in advance, and insisted on paying to celebrate this milestone. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jordan was going to pay for dinner with money that likely included my contributions to our joint account, celebrating a success that I had supported through countless late nights of encouragement and sacrifice of my own time to accommodate Jordan's demanding schedule. I agreed to the dinner, but I had my own plans for how the evening would unfold. I dressed carefully that night, choosing an outfit that made me feel powerful and professional rather than romantic or celebratory. I put on my best poker face and prepared myself mentally for what was coming. As we sat across from each other at a white tablecloth table with candlelight flickering between us, Jordan was animated and excited, talking about the new opportunities this promotion would bring, the increased salary, the possibility of finally getting that house we had talked about. I listened with a slight smile, nodding occasionally, while my mind was running through the presentation I had prepared for this exact moment. When the waiter brought our appetizers, I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila envelope. Jordan looked at it curiously, probably assuming I had gotten a card or some small gift to commemorate the promotion. Instead, I slid the envelope across the table and said, in a voice that was calm and steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins, that I had something important Jordan needed to see. Jordan opened the envelope with a confused smile, still not understanding what was happening. Inside was the invoice, printed on professional letterhead I had created, looking as official and legitimate as any business document. I watched Jordan's face as those eyes scanned the first page, saw the exact moment comprehension began to dawn. The smile faded, replaced by confusion, then recognition, then something that looked almost like fear. Jordan looked up at me and started to say something, but I held up my hand and told Jordan to read the entire document before speaking. I wanted every word, every number, every piece of evidence to sink in before we had any conversation about it. For the next 20 minutes, Jordan read in silence while I calmly ate my appetizer and watched every micro-expression that crossed that face I thought I knew so well. I saw shock, denial, anger, calculation. Jordan's mind was clearly racing, trying to figure out how much I knew, how I had found out, what my endgame was. When Jordan finally finished reading and looked up at me with eyes that were now clearly panicked, I leaned forward and said something I had been practicing for days. I told Jordan that I knew everything about Alex, Morgan, and Casey. I knew about every lie, every manipulation, every dollar spent on maintaining these secret relationships. I knew about the systematic theft from our joint account, the elaborate calendars designed to keep stories straight, the separate lives Jordan had been living for years, and most importantly, I had documented everything with the same meticulous attention to detail Jordan had used to document the deception. The silence that followed was deafening, even in a crowded restaurant full of conversation and clinking silverware. Jordan tried several different approaches over the next few minutes: denial, minimization, justification, emotional manipulation. Jordan claimed the relationships meant nothing, that I was the only one who truly mattered, that the others were mistakes that had gotten out of hand. Jordan cried, right there in the restaurant, tears that might have moved me if I hadn't spent the past 3 weeks hardening my heart against exactly this kind of performance. Jordan reached across the table to grab my hand, but I pulled away, keeping my expression neutral and my voice level. I explained that I wasn't interested in excuses or explanations. This wasn't a conversation where Jordan could talk their way out of consequences. This was a business transaction now, a settlement of accounts, a demand for compensation for services rendered under fraudulent pretenses. The invoice was real, the numbers were accurate and supported by documentation, and I expected it to be taken seriously. Jordan's tears stopped almost immediately, replaced by a calculating look I had never seen before. This was the real Jordan, I realized. The one who could turn emotions on and off like a faucet, who could assess situations strategically without getting lost in feelings. Jordan told me I was being ridiculous, that you can't invoice someone for a relationship, that no court would ever take this seriously. I smiled then, a cold smile that felt foreign on my face but appropriate for the moment, and told Jordan to read the appendix that outlined the legal precedents for exactly this kind of claim. I had done my homework, consulted with lawyers, and prepared for exactly this response. Jordan looked at the document again, flipping to the back pages, and I could see the realization settling in that this wasn't just an emotional gesture. This was a legitimate legal claim backed by evidence and case law. Jordan's face went pale, then flushed red with what I assumed was anger. Jordan accused me of being cold, calculating, unforgiving. Jordan said that if I had ever truly loved them, I couldn't possibly reduce our relationship to a financial transaction. And that's when I delivered the line I had been saving, the one that captured everything I felt. I told Jordan that I had loved them completely, authentically, with my whole heart. But Jordan had never loved me. Jordan had used me. And when someone uses you while pretending to love you, when someone systematically deceives and steals from you while claiming to build a future with you, then yes, it absolutely becomes a financial transaction. Because that's all it ever was to Jordan, whether Jordan wanted to admit it or not. Every choice Jordan made was a calculation. How much time to spend with each person, how much money to allocate to each relationship, how to maximize benefits while minimizing risk of discovery. So I was simply applying the same calculus, except I was being honest about it. The dinner ended shortly after that. Jordan stood up abruptly, threw some cash on the table, and walked out of the restaurant. I sat there for a few more minutes, finishing my wine, feeling a strange sense of calm despite the scene that had just unfolded. I had done what I set out to do. I had confronted Jordan, not with tears and accusations, but with facts and accountability. I had taken control of a narrative that could have easily spiraled into me being painted as the crazy, vindictive ex. Instead, I had positioned myself as someone seeking legitimate compensation for fraud and theft. The waiter came by and asked if everything was okay, clearly having witnessed at least part of the exchange. I told him everything was fine, actually better than it had been in a long time, and ordered dessert. I wasn't going to let Jordan's dramatic exit ruin what was, in many ways, one of the most empowering moments of my life. When I got home that night, Jordan was already packing. Clothes were being thrown into suitcases, toiletries swept from bathroom counters into bags, the apartment already looking ransacked and incomplete. Jordan was on the phone, presumably with one of the others, crying and telling them about the crazy ex who had just humiliated them at dinner with ridiculous demands for money. I didn't interrupt or engage. I simply went to our bedroom, my bedroom now, and locked the door. I could hear Jordan moving around the apartment for hours, making calls, probably trying to figure out damage control, possibly consulting with lawyers about whether my invoice had any legal standing. I didn't care what Jordan was doing because I had already moved to the next phase of my plan. The next morning, Jordan was gone. A note left on the kitchen counter said we would need to discuss dissolving our shared assets and accounts, that Jordan's lawyer would be in touch, and that I needed to drop this ridiculous invoice situation if I wanted any cooperation in separating our lives. The note was threatening in tone, trying to leverage my need for a clean separation against my demand for accountability. But Jordan had miscalculated. I didn't actually need Jordan's cooperation for anything because I had already transferred my half of the joint account funds to my own account, perfectly legal since they were joint funds, and I took only my 50%. I had already consulted with a landlord about taking over the lease entirely, or breaking it and moving somewhere new. I had already separated every aspect of my life that was entangled with Jordan's, at least financially and legally. The only thing left was the actual accounting, the settling of debts, the payment I was demanding for years of deception. Jordan's lawyer contacted me within a week, a slick-looking corporate attorney who probably charged $500 an hour and specialized in making problems disappear. The lawyer set up a meeting at their office, a glass and steel tower downtown that was meant to intimidate. I showed up in my best professional attire, carrying my 200-page documentation in a leather portfolio that looked just as expensive as anything in that law office. The lawyer started the meeting with condescension, treating me like an emotional, irrational woman who was lashing out after a bad breakup. They told me that while they understood I was hurt, these kinds of claims were frivolous and would never hold up in court. They offered me $20,000 to go away quietly, to sign an NDA and never speak about Jordan or this situation again. $20,000, roughly 12% of what I was owed. I declined the offer immediately and told the lawyer to actually read my documentation before making any more assumptions about the strength of my case. I watched the lawyer's expression change as they flipped through the pages, seeing the bank statements, the receipts, the screenshots, the timeline analyses, the witness confirmations. This wasn't the emotional rant of a scorned partner. This was a legitimate accounting of financial fraud and misappropriation of funds. I could see the lawyer mentally recalculating the situation, recognizing that I had a real case that could potentially be won in civil court. The lawyer asked for time to consult with their client and review the materials more thoroughly. I gave them 2 weeks, sent them a digital copy of all my documentation, and left that office feeling more powerful than I had in years. I wasn't going to be bullied or bought off or made to feel like I was crazy for demanding accountability. I had done the work, built the case, and I was going to see it through to whatever end made sense for me. During those 2 weeks, something interesting happened. Alex reached out to me. Somehow, I still don't know how exactly, Alex had found out about the invoice situation, possibly through mutual friends or maybe through their own investigative work after things with Jordan started falling apart. Alex sent me a message through social media asking if we could talk. I was hesitant at first, unsure if this was somehow a trap or a way for Jordan to gather information about my plans. But curiosity won out, and I agreed to meet Alex at a neutral location, a coffee shop halfway between our respective neighborhoods. When I walked into that coffee shop and saw Alex sitting at a corner table, I saw my own pain reflected in another person's eyes. Alex looked tired, devastated, and angry all at once. We talked for 3 hours that first meeting, comparing notes, sharing stories, realizing the full scope of Jordan's deception. Alex had also discovered the truth around the same time I did, having found some evidence that contradicted one of Jordan's stories. Alex had confronted Jordan, been fed more lies, and then done their own investigation that revealed everything. As Alex and I talked, we realized that we weren't enemies or rivals. We were allies who had been victimized by the same person. We decided to coordinate our approaches. Alex was pursuing a different kind of justice, focusing on exposing Jordan's behavior to mutual friends and professional contacts, while I was focused on financial accountability. Together, we were a formidable team, and I think that's when Jordan truly started to understand the magnitude of the situation. It wasn't just me seeking compensation. It was multiple people refusing to let the deception be swept under the rug. Through Alex, I also connected with Morgan and Casey. We formed an unlikely support group, 4 people who had been completely separate in Jordan's carefully compartmentalized life, now united in our demand for truth and accountability. Each of us handled our pain differently, but we all agreed on one thing. Jordan couldn't be allowed to just walk away from this without consequences. Morgan decided to write about the experience publicly, publishing an essay about deception in modern relationships that went viral, and while not naming Jordan specifically, made it very clear what kind of person Jordan was. Casey pursued legal action for a different kind of fraud, related to money Jordan had borrowed with false pretenses. And I continued with my invoice, with my documentation, with my systematic approach to making sure Jordan paid, both literally and metaphorically. When Jordan's lawyer contacted me again after the 2 weeks, the tone was completely different. They acknowledged that I had a legitimate case, that the documentation was thorough and compelling, and that they wanted to negotiate a settlement rather than go to court. They offered $90,000, roughly half of what I was claiming, in exchange for an NDA and my agreement not to pursue any further legal action. I considered the offer carefully. $90,000 was significant money, enough to rebuild my life, fund the therapy I needed, and have something left over for the future I was going to build without Jordan. But it was still only half of what I believed I was owed. And the NDA would mean I couldn't speak about what happened, couldn't warn others, couldn't use my story to help people in similar situations. I countered with $130,000 and no NDA. I would agree not to actively pursue Jordan or speak negatively about them in professional contexts, but I wouldn't sign away my right to tell my own story or share my experience if I chose to. I explained that my story wasn't just about Jordan. It was about my journey, my recovery, my decisions, and I wouldn't surrender ownership of my own narrative for any amount of money. The negotiations went back and forth for another month, with Jordan's lawyer pushing hard for the NDA and me standing firm on my refusal to be silenced. Finally, we reached an agreement. $115,000, no NDA, but with an agreement that I wouldn't use Jordan's real name or identifying details in any public discussion of the situation. I could tell my story, but I had to protect Jordan's privacy, even while exposing the behavior. It felt like a fair compromise, and I accepted the settlement. The day I received the payment, transferred directly to my bank account in one lump sum, was surreal. I sat looking at my bank balance, seeing 6 figures where there had been a modest savings account before, and I felt a complex mixture of emotions. There was satisfaction that I had stood my ground and gotten compensation for what was done to me. There was relief that the intense months of documentation and legal maneuvering were over. There was sadness for the years I had lost to deception and the innocence I would never get back. There was also a strange sense of emptiness, because revenge or justice or accountability, whatever you want to call what I had achieved, doesn't actually heal the wound of betrayal. It doesn't undo the past or restore the trust that was shattered. I used part of the money to move to a new city, somewhere Jordan had no connections and I could start completely fresh. I used another portion to fund intensive therapy, working with a specialist in trauma recovery to process not just the betrayal itself, but also my response to it, examining whether my methodical approach had been healthy coping or just another form of avoidance. I used some of the money to go back to school part-time, pursuing a degree in a field I had always been interested in, but never had the time or resources to explore while I was building what I thought was a shared life. The rest I invested carefully, creating a financial foundation for the future I was going to build on my own terms. In the months that followed the settlement, I had a lot of time to reflect on everything that happened. People have asked me if I regret my approach, if I wish I had handled things differently, if I think I was too cold or calculating in my response to heartbreak. My answer is complicated. I don't regret holding Jordan accountable. I don't regret documenting everything and demanding compensation for what was taken from me. I don't regret refusing to play the role of the forgive and forget victim that everyone seemed to expect me to be. But I do recognize that my approach came from a place of deep pain that I was channeling into action rather than processing emotionally. The documentation, the invoice, the systematic approach, these were all ways of maintaining control in a situation where I felt completely powerless. They were coping mechanisms that happened to also serve the purpose of achieving justice, but they weren't necessarily the healthiest way to deal with trauma. What I learned through therapy is that you can do the right thing for complicated reasons, and that's okay. You can demand accountability while also acknowledging your own wounds. You can be both strong and hurt, both strategic and emotional, both justified in your actions and in need of healing. The human experience isn't binary, and my response to betrayal didn't have to be either perfectly graceful or completely vengeful. It could be messy and complicated and multifaceted, just like everything else in life. I also learned something important about forgiveness that I want to share with everyone watching this. When people tell you to forgive and forget, what they're often really asking for is their own comfort. They're asking you to minimize your pain so they don't have to witness it or deal with the complexity of supporting you through it. True forgiveness, if it happens at all, comes from a place of healing and choice, not from pressure or expectation. And forgetting is neither possible nor desirable when the lesson of the experience is valuable and important. I don't know if I've forgiven Jordan. Some days I think I have, in the sense that I no longer actively wish harm on Jordan or spend emotional energy thinking about revenge. Other days I feel the anger fresh and sharp, especially when I think about the years I lost or the trust issues that now affect my new relationships. But what I do know is that I've forgiven myself for being trusting when I should have been suspicious, for ignoring red flags I can only see in hindsight, for believing in a love that was never real. That self-forgiveness was actually harder and more important than forgiving Jordan ever could be. As for Jordan, I have no idea what happened after our settlement. I blocked all contact, removed myself from mutual social circles, and moved to a different city. I occasionally hear things through the grapevine. Apparently Jordan moved to the West Coast, possibly to escape the reputation damage that came from multiple people refusing to stay silent about the deception. I heard that Alex's expose piece, while not naming Jordan, was recognized by enough people who knew the situation that it affected Jordan's professional reputation. I heard that Morgan's legal case resulted in another settlement, adding to the financial consequences Jordan faced. But mostly, I don't think about Jordan at all anymore. The person I thought I loved never existed. That was just a character Jordan played, a mask worn to get what they wanted. The real Jordan is a stranger I'm glad to have out of my life, regardless of what that person is doing now. What I think about instead is the person I've become through this experience. I'm more cautious now, definitely more skeptical, but also more in touch with my own worth and my own boundaries. I know now that I deserve honesty, loyalty, and respect in my relationships, and I'm willing to walk away from anything that doesn't meet those standards, no matter how promising it might seem. I've learned that my instincts are valuable and should be listened to, that uncomfortable feelings shouldn't be dismissed or rationalized away. I've learned that I'm stronger than I ever knew, capable of surviving devastation, and coming out the other side not just intact but actually improved in many ways. The friends I've made since moving to my new city are different from the ones I had before. They know my story, they know what I went through, and they respect the boundaries I've set and the healing I'm doing. I've found a community of people who value authenticity and vulnerability, who understand that strength doesn't mean pretending you're not hurt, and who celebrate the complexity of the human experience without trying to reduce it to simple narratives. I've also found that my story resonates with more people than I ever expected. When I started carefully sharing what I went through, without using Jordan's name or identifying details, honoring my settlement agreement, I was overwhelmed by the number of people who reached out to tell me they had experienced similar betrayals. Some had been in relationships built on lies. Others had discovered financial fraud by trusted partners. Still others had been victimized by people who maintained multiple relationships simultaneously. The common thread in all these stories was the pressure to forgive and forget, the expectation that they should minimize their pain for the comfort of others, the judgment they faced when they refused to play the role of the gracious victim. Hearing these stories, I realized that my decision to document and bill instead of forgive and forget wasn't just about my personal situation. It was about challenging a cultural narrative that protects perpetrators while demanding endless grace from victims. It was about saying that accountability matters, that consequences are appropriate, that demanding compensation for harm done is not vindictive but justified. It was about reclaiming my power and my narrative in a situation designed to leave me powerless and voiceless. Now, I want to take a moment to address something directly to anyone watching who might be going through a similar situation right now. If you've been betrayed, lied to, used, or manipulated by someone you trusted, I want you to know that whatever you're feeling is valid. If you're angry, that's valid. If you're sad, that's valid. If you're numb and disconnected, that's valid too. There's no right way to respond to betrayal. No timeline for healing, no correct emotion you should be feeling. What matters is that you honor your own experience and make choices that serve your own healing and well-being, not the comfort of the person who hurt you, or the expectations of people who haven't walked in your shoes. If you choose to forgive, that's beautiful and valid. If you choose to demand accountability, that's powerful and valid. If you choose to walk away without closure, that's strong and valid. Your path is yours alone, and nobody else gets to dictate what healing should look like for you. Trust yourself, protect yourself, and know that you can survive this and build something beautiful from the wreckage. I also want to say something to anyone who might be in Jordan's position. Anyone who is maintaining deception in their relationships. Anyone who is using people while claiming to love them. Anyone who is building a life on lies. Stop. Just stop. Whatever short-term benefits you're getting from your deception, whatever emotional needs you're fulfilling by having multiple people invested in you, whatever sense of power or control you feel from successfully manipulating others, none of it is worth the harm you're causing. You're creating trauma that will ripple through people's lives for years, affecting their ability to trust, to love, to feel safe in relationships. You're stealing time and resources and emotional energy from people who deserve honesty and respect. And eventually, the deception will collapse, as it always does, and the consequences will be far worse than if you had simply been honest from the beginning. Get help. Examine why you feel the need to deceive. Work on the issues that drive you to hurt others, and make better choices before you destroy more lives. Looking back now, almost 2 years after that dinner where I presented Jordan with an invoice, I can see my journey clearly. I went from devastation to determination, from victimhood to agency, from heartbreak to healing. The path wasn't linear. There were setbacks and bad days and moments where I questioned everything I was doing. But overall, the trajectory has been upward, toward a life that feels more authentic and aligned with my values than the one I was living before. I'm in a new relationship now, with someone who knows my whole story and respects the boundaries I've set and the healing I'm still doing. This relationship is different. It's built on transparency and honesty from the beginning, with both of us committed to open communication even when it's uncomfortable. I won't say I'm completely healed or that I don't still have trust issues, because that would be dishonest. But I'm working on it, making progress, learning to be vulnerable again while also maintaining healthy boundaries. I'm also pursuing my passion for architecture in new ways, working on projects that focus on creating safe spaces for people recovering from trauma. There's something deeply meaningful about using my professional skills to help others find sanctuary and healing, to create physical environments that support emotional recovery. It feels like a way of transforming my own experience into something that serves others, a way of making meaning from pain. The money from the settlement is long gone, invested in my education, my relocation, my therapy, and my new life. But what I gained from that experience, the knowledge of my own strength, the clarity about what I deserve, the connections with others who survived similar betrayals, the skills I developed in documenting and advocating for myself, those things are priceless and permanent. I wouldn't wish what I went through on anyone, but I also wouldn't trade who I've become because of it. So here's what I want you to take away from my story. When someone hurts you and expects you to forgive and forget, you don't owe them that. You don't owe anyone your pain minimized for their comfort. You have every right to demand accountability, to seek compensation for harm done, to refuse to play the role of the gracious victim. You also have every right to choose forgiveness if that's what serves your healing, but it should be your choice, made in your own time, for your own reasons, not because someone pressured you or shamed you or told you it was the right thing to do. Your healing journey is yours alone, and you get to determine what it looks like. And if you choose to document and bill instead of forgive and forget, like I did, that's okay too. That's valid. That's powerful. That's taking control of your narrative and demanding that the harm done to you be acknowledged and addressed. Is it conventional? No. Will everyone understand or approve? Definitely not. But if it serves your healing and your sense of justice, then it's the right choice for you regardless of what anyone else thinks. I chose to document and bill, and I don't regret it for a moment. Now I want to ask you something important. What did you think about my approach to handling this betrayal? Do you think I was justified in creating an invoice and demanding payment? Or do you think I should have taken a different path? Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between forgiveness and accountability? I really want to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below, because these conversations matter. We learn from each other's stories, we support each other through shared experiences, and we challenge the narratives that tell us there's only one right way to respond to pain. So please, take a moment to share your perspective. And if this story resonated with you, if it touched something in your heart or made you think differently about betrayal and accountability and healing, please leave a like on this video. It helps me know that sharing my story matters, that it's reaching people who need to hear it, that vulnerability has value. Also, if you want to hear more stories like this, stories of survival, transformation, and finding strength in the aftermath of devastation, please subscribe to Living Through It. This channel is dedicated to sharing real experiences from real people who have lived through difficult situations and come out the other side. We don't sugarcoat the pain. We don't pretend healing is simple or linear, but we also celebrate the resilience of the human spirit and the possibility of building beautiful lives from broken pieces. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our stories. Thank you for listening to my journey. Thank you for being part of this community. Thank you for understanding that there's no one right way to survive betrayal, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to minimize your pain for someone else's comfort. You are strong, you are valuable, and you deserve relationships built on honesty and respect. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise. Take care of yourselves, honor your own experiences, and remember, you get to write your own story, even when someone else tries to write it for you. I'm living proof that you can take back your narrative, demand accountability, and build a life that's even better than the one that was taken from you. You can do this. You can survive this. You can thrive after this. I believe in you, and I'm rooting for you every step of the way.